You see them everywhere, right? In malls, office buildings, concerts, private security. They've got the uniform, they've got the serious look, but what can they actually do? You might be surprised to find out that the line between a security guard and a police officer is a whole lot blurrier than you think, and knowing the difference, well, it's pretty important. So let's get into it.
All right, let's start with the classic example, the mall cop. We've all seen it. A guard confronts someone, and you can't help but wonder, what are their actual powers here? Can they arrest you? Can they demand to search your bags? The truth is, the answer isn't a simple yes or no. It all comes down to a really crucial legal difference.
Okay, so this right here, this is the absolute core of it all. On the left, you have a sworn police officer. Their authority comes directly from the state, from the law. They enforce public laws, and their powers are pretty broad. But now, look over at the right. Private security? It's a whole different ballgame. Their authority comes from their employer, the person who owns the property. Their main job is just to protect private stuff. And here's the real kicker. In the eyes of the law, their powers are often the exact same as any private citizen, like you or me. And that is a massive distinction.
So, if their power is that limited, what can they do? Well, it turns out they do have certain privileges, but they're wrapped in some very, very specific legal conditions. Let's break down what the law actually allows them to get away with.
Now, I know what you're thinking when you see this list: detain, arrest, search. You're probably going, whoa, hold on. You just told me they're like any other citizen. And you're right. It's confusing. The key is that while they can technically do these things, it's nothing like how the police do it. They're usually acting under something called a citizen's arrest, or much more commonly, a very specific legal privilege designed for one very particular situation.
And here it is. It's called the shopkeeper's privilege. Honestly, this one single legal idea is the foundation for almost everything a security guard in a store does. It gives a merchant the right to detain someone they suspect is shoplifting. But, and this is so critical, it is not a blank check. This privilege comes with some really strict rules.
These are the rules of the game. People in the legal world often call them the three reasonables, and for a detention to be legal, all three of these conditions have to be met. First, the guard needs reasonable grounds, not just a hunch, but a genuine, fact-based belief that a theft happened. Second, the detention has to be done in a reasonable manner. No unnecessary force, no shaming them in front of the whole store. And third, it has to be for a reasonable duration, basically just long enough to check things out or call the real police. If they violate even one of these, poof, the privilege is gone.
So, what happens when security gets one of those reasonables wrong? Well, let's look at a real-world case, Moore versus Federated, to see how this all plays out in a court of law. It's really a textbook example of the serious consequences when private security oversteps.
The setup is super simple, something that could happen any day. A customer's in a store, just doing their thing, when suddenly, store employees suspect them of shoplifting. And right there, that's the moment a critical decision has to be made. So, acting on that suspicion, the security team makes their move. They stop the customer and physically prevent them from leaving the store. The second they do that, you can imagine a stopwatch starts ticking on those three reasonables we just talked about. This quote really gets to the heart of the whole legal fight. You see, the court wasn't actually focused on whether the person shoplifted or not. The real, central question was whether the security team's actions were legally justified. Did they meet that standard of the shopkeeper's privilege? Did they have reasonable grounds? Was the way they handled it reasonable? And the court's verdict was a big no. They found that the security team had completely overstepped their legal authority. The detention was ruled unlawful. In other words, a false arrest. And this wasn't just some little embarrassment. It led to huge financial penalties for the company. It just goes to show you the massive liability that comes from a single bad decision. That case shows the risk of doing too much. But there's a whole other side to this coin, the risk of doing too little. In the legal world, this is known as negligent security. And believe me, it is a huge issue for property owners.
So, for someone to win a negligent security lawsuit, they have to prove all four of these things. First, that the owner had a duty to provide some level of security. Second, that they breached that duty. Maybe they had broken locks or poorly trained guards. Third, they have to prove that this failure is what directly caused the injury. And finally, they have to show that there were actual damages or losses. It's a pretty high bar to clear, but when a property owner fails, it can be incredibly costly.
So what's the big takeaway here? For security leaders and the companies that hire them, it all boils down to one thing: mitigation. You can't just hire a guard and hope for the best. The absolute best defense against a lawsuit, whether it's for false arrest or negligence, is having rock-solid policies, nonstop training, and active supervision. Understanding the law isn't optional. It's the absolute foundation of this entire profession.
All right, so far we've been talking about physical actions. But what about technology? The line between security surveillance and an invasion of your privacy is getting blurrier every single day. So where exactly does the law stand on this?
This lays it out pretty clearly. Using security cameras in public areas, like a storefront or a lobby, is generally legal for security purposes, no problem there. But the moment that camera gets pointed into an area where people have a reasonable expectation of privacy, and we're talking about places like fitting rooms or restrooms, well, you've just crossed a major legal boundary. Doing that creates an incredibly high risk of getting sued for invasion of privacy.
And that brings us to the big final question we have to think about. With facial recognition, AI monitoring, and all this other advanced tech becoming common, the old lines are really starting to blur. So who gets to decide what's acceptable security and what crosses over into invasive surveillance? It's a debate that touches on our laws, our ethics, and our basic expectations of safety versus privacy. And it's a conversation that's only going to get more intense from here.